You may be seated. The court is now back in session. This afternoon, we will hear the testimony of a new witness, that is TCW 490. As we informed the public this morning, and as reported by the greffier, the witness is present and ready to be summoned to the courtroom for the testimony by the chamber. Once again, I'd like the greffier Sakolbuti to report regarding the witness status and regarding his relationship, if any, through the parties, and whether he's already took an oath. You may proceed. Sakolbuti, Mr. President, the witness is summoned by the chamber to testify, that is witness TCW 490, is present in the waiting room to be called by the chamber. The chamber expressed that to his knowledge he has no relationship by blood or by law through any of the civil party. However, he has a relationship with a civil party 124, but no relationship by blood or by law through any of the parties or any of the accused. The witness already took an oath voluntarily this morning. Thank you. Court officer, could you invite the witness to the courtroom? And if he is accompanied by a duty counsel, please also invite the duty counsel. Man with all gray hair, supposed to be intelligent.
Ini pun, min phượng ni chẳng bù min sa.
Good afternoon, Mr. Witness. First, we will ask you some initial information regarding your background before we ask you questions, and we will also inform you regarding the use of the microphone and how the system works in the courtroom. Before you respond, please wait until you see the red light on the microphone so that your voice will go through the interpretation system and so it will be translated into the working languages of the court. Mr. Witness, can you tell us your name? My name is Ong Thong Heung. Mr. Ong Thong Heung, can you tell us your date of birth? You need to wait until you see the red light. Response. I was born on the 7th August 1945. Thank you. Where is your current address? I lived in Brussels in Belgium. Thank you. What is your current occupation? I am a retiree. Thank you. What is your father's name? My father's name is Ong Lee alias Dauk. Thank you. And your mother's name? Her name is Niang Tri Yu. Both of them passed away. Thank you. What is your wife's name? Chu Bun Ni is her name. Thank you. How many children do you have? I have 2 daughters. Thank you. Mr. Ong Thong Heung, as reported by the gratifier, to your knowledge, you had a relationship with a civil party, TCCP 124, but you do not have any relationship by blood or by law through the 3 accused, that is Nuji, Ieng Sari, Khieu Sampon, and any other parties who have been recognized as civil parties in this case. Is that correct? Response. Yes, that is correct. Also, as reported, you voluntarily took an oath this morning. Is that correct? Response. Yes, that is correct. Mr. Ong Thong Heung, in your capacity as a witness before this chamber, we will now inform you of your right and obligation. As a witness through the proceedings before this chamber, You may refuse to respond to any question or assertion that may incriminate you. Self-incrimination means if you believe that your response may incriminate you, you may decline to respond. Do you understand this right? Response: yes, I do. Do you need a duty counsel, or you wish to testify on your own without the assistance of a duty counsel? Response: thank you, Mr. President, but I do not need a duty counsel. Thank you. Mr. Ong Tong Heung, also in your capacity as a witness to testify before this chamber, you must respond to the questions put to you by the chamber or by any of the parties, except in the case that you believe your response may incriminate you. As a witness, you must tell the truth that you have known, have heard, have experienced, and remember or observed personally regarding the events related to the questions put to you by judges of the bench or any of the parties. Do you understand that? Yes, I do. Thank you. Mr. Witness, had you ever given any interview to the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges of the ECCC during the past years? And if so, how many times and where were the interview taken place? Response: I was interviewed once in Phnom Penh. I cannot recall the location clearly, but it was somewhere near the vicinity of the Independence Monument. Question: can you recall the date? Response: it was about more than 3 years ago. Thank you. Regarding the interview that you made with the investigators of the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges, and before you came into this courtroom, have you reread that interview? That is the one that you made with the investigators of the OCIJ in order to recollect your memory? Response: yes, I reread the statement and it is correct. Thank you. The chamber would like to inform the prosecution that regarding the hearing of the testimony of this witness, the chamber will be given the floor first, and you may proceed. Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors. Good afternoon, everyone in and around the courtroom. Good afternoon, Mr. Ong Tong Heung. I'd like to ask you some questions. So please try to bear with us and respond to my questions. First, it is in relation to your education. Can you tell us which schools did you attend and what degrees did you obtain? Response: I studied at my native village. I also studied at the college in Kotom, and later on I attended lycée in Phnom Penh, and then I went to study in France in 1965 in political economic field. Questions? Besides that political education field, economic field, did you study in other specialized area? Response: no, I did not. But I closely followed the situation as it happened in Europe and also the French literature. Questions? Now I'd like to touch upon your living in France. Can you tell us the main reason for you to leave Cambodia for France? Response: as the other Cambodian people or people in the third world country who regarded France as a symbol of education, since my childhood it was my dream to go to France, and as I got the opportunity, so did I go to France. Thank you. When did you go to France, and how long did you stay in France? Response: I stayed in France from 1965 until 1976. Thank you. Question: did you ever become a member of a political party or any political movement during your stay in France? Response: while I was in France, initially I was sympathized with the French Socialist Party, and after the 1970 coup d'etat, and after the appeal by the Prince Sihanouk, that is the 5 points in the appeal, which was made in 1970, I volunteered to be a member of the Khmer Union, of the Khmer Students Union. Thank you. Question: can you tell us the reason for you to become a member of the French Socialist Party and later a member of the Khmer Students Union? Response: initially I became a member of the French Students Union because at that time I was fond of Michel Rocard. I respected him a lot, and my French friends or friends from Africa also had the tendency toward that movement, and I decided to do so. Thank you. Question: what was the reason for you to join the Khmer Students Union? Response: since I was in Cambodia, I always had a huge respect for the 3 clean people, namely Khieu Samphan, Hu Jun, and Hu Nim. And while I was in France, I clearly knew the 3 used to be members of the Khmer Students Union, and for that reason, I like to follow their path and to use them as my exemplary models. Thank you. Question: Can you tell us the main purpose for the establishment of the Khmer Students' Union? Response. It was actually a long story. However, as I know, Khmer students who first arrived in France were only a few, that is after the Second World War. Those students, they were the senior students, including Rati Wong, formed an association, that is the Khmer Students Association, and amongst those students at that time, that association was the only association in France at the time, and there were about 20 members in that association, although I am not clear. I learned of that during my research for my book. They both tried to form in order for the independence of Cambodia. However, their resistance later split into two. First, they were the leftists, and secondly, they were the rightists. And the Khmer Student Union was the leftist movement. Thank you. Question. Can you tell us the relationship between the Khmer Students Union and the Communist Party of Cambodia? Response. Frankly speaking, at that time, I did not know that there was a Communist Party of Cambodia in Cambodia at all. Thank you. Question. Who was actually the president of the Khmer Students' Union, and what was the criteria to become a member? And how the information was disseminated within the Khmer Students' Union? Response. Shortly after my arrival, Mr. Tôi Kham Duon, who already passed away at S21, and then there was Sun Si-kun, who was the president of that union. At that time, I contacted him at the Khmer House, and as I knew at that time, Sun Si-kun was the president of that union. Thank you. Question. Who was actually the founder of the Khmer Students' Union? Response. My apology. As I wrote in my article, the founders were Ieng Sari, Khieu Sampon, Chun Mom, and some other senior people whose names I cannot recall. But I wrote all of their names in my book. Thank you. Question. When or in what year was the Khmer Students' Union established? Response. I cannot recall it clearly, but it was around 1956. I have to check my book to make sure. Thank you. Question. When did you become a member of that union? Response. I cannot recall the exact date, but clearly it was after the coup d'etat by Marshal Lon Nol. Thank you. My next question is related to Ieng Sari and Khieu Sampon. Can you tell us when Ieng Sari and Khieu Sampon returned from France to Cambodia? Response. I do not know the exact date. Of course, I wrote all that in my book, but I cannot recall offhand. Kisampon returned probably in 1954, but I cannot recall the exact date. And Ieng Sari arrived before Kisampon. Thank you. Question. Did you know or did you read any article and learned all the reasons for their arrival in Cambodia? Response. At that time, I did not know the reason. Occasionally, I learned of the name of Kisampon as he was mistreated. He was stripped naked near the Independent Monument as he wrote an article in the Observateur newspaper. That's how I learned, but I do not know the real reason. Thank you. Question. Did you know or hear about the word Khmer Rouge while living in France? Response. I heard of the word Khmer Rouge since I was in Cambodia, and while I was young, the word Khmer Rouge represented the cleanness, and they were represented by Hu Num, Hu Yunt, and Kieu Sampon.
Thank you. Question. I would like to now move to the next question on the National United Front of Cambodia, which was established before 1975. Can you tell the court about this front? When was it established? When was it established, and what was the reason for its establishment? The National United Front of Cambodia, or FUNC, was established in Peking in China after the statement made by Samdech Sihanouk. It was a 5-point statement of Prince Sihanouk, and Chun Mom and Sarancha were the one who drafted the statement. Question. Can you elaborate further the primary objective of the establishment of this National United Front of Cambodia? I respond to this question based on my understanding of the situation back then. My understanding of the situation then was that the political programs of the National United Front of Cambodia then was to reunite Cambodian and Khmer people in order to build a just and fair society, and it was not a communist society. So people from different political belief could join the front. They could be from the royal families or from other political trends. Question. Who was the chairman or president of this front? The chairman of FUNC was His Royal Highness Samdech Norodom Sihanouk and Samdech Pai Nut. Question. Where did the FUNC receive its funding from? Back then I was still young. I did not know that much, but it was a supposition, but I thought that Cambodian people in the country would not have money to send to support this movement in Beijing. Probably it was supported by the government of China. Question. Did Khieu Samphan or Nguyen Chia ever participate in the Phong?
Look.
Response. I knew Mr. Khieu Samphan. I had never met him in person. Not until today I had never met him in person. And Nguyen Chia, I did not even hear of his name. At that time I did not hear of Nguyen Chia. I did not know. But I learned about Mr. Khieu Samphan, and he was, of course, in the Phong. But Nguyen Chia and Pol Pot, I did not hear of them. I did not know what position they held at the time. Question. How about Ieng Sari? Did Ieng Sari ever join the activities of the Phong? Response. When I was in a foreign country, gradually I got to know Mr. Ieng Sari. By getting to know, I means I did not know him in personally, but I heard more and more about him. I cannot recall it exactly, but probably immediately after the coup d'etat, or around 2 years following the coup d'etat, he went to Beijing representing the Cambodian party, and at that time I was a student, and I thought that Ieng Sari would go there in order to provide support to Samdech Sihanouk. He could act, I thought at that time, that as Zhu Enlai who was supporting Mao Zedong. But when he got there, then he knew many Cambodian students who used to study during his time in France. And then he had influence on the Cambodian student community over there, and it gained momentum from then. Question. Can you explain the court, the relationship between Ieng Sari with the communist movement in the country and his relationship with Beijing? Well, at that time, I was very young compared to other senior people. If you ask me about that relationship, it's beyond my ability to respond. Question. So the Phong started its activity in Beijing, and then it came to Cambodia. Can you tell the court in which areas of Cambodia did the Phong operate? Response. To my knowledge, and according to the information I received at that time, the activity started mainly in the countryside. There were some sympathizers in the city as well. It is my supposition, but I heard from Mr. Ieng Sari once in a while that the Phong political agenda was based on reuniting Cambodia, and Mr. Ieng Sari did not take that political program very seriously, but it's once again, it is my supposition, President. Witness, we have heard times and again that you mentioned about the suppositions in your statement. Once again, if you try to guess anything, then it's not going to have any probative weight in your testimony. So you have to rely on your answer on any particular source rather than trying to speculate that does not carry any evidentiary weight before the chamber. The defense counsel for Kilsampon, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to all of you. Good afternoon, witness. I apologize for interrupting you once again. I'm going to request once again, if it's possible, to slow down because we have a hard time following the French interpretation. Thank you.
There may be two options. Mr. Prosecutor, can you make sure that you press the button of your mic and you should ensure that there is a pause between questions and answer. You can, in addition, the AV technician, please make sure that the mic for the witness be activated once the question has already been asked and interpreted. Question. Mr. Ong Tong Hyun, I would like to now continue my question. You told us about Ieng Sari communication with the Cambodian student in France and the FUNC in. How did Mr. Ieng Sari communicate information from Cambodia to students in France? In my personal observation, it was not my supposition, but it was my observation that Mr. Ieng Sari circulated information through the information bulletin of the front, and secondly, he tried to establish a core force of Cambodian students, and he would train them to hold on to the standpoint which he represents back in Cambodia. Question. For FUNC, following its inception, did it create any other movements? And if so, where those movements were taking place? No, I don't know about that. Thank you. Question. About Sihanoukism. The Sihanoukist movement was established, and who were the founders of this movement, and when was it established? Sihanoukist movement was established by Samdech Sihanouk himself. And Sihanouk's movement had many trends, one of which were those who were close to the royal palace, and another supporter were those who worked closely with Samdech Painut and Saran Cha, namely Van Pini, Chan Juran, Hao Nam Hong, and others. Question. Following the establishment of the Phong, did it also establish a representative office of Phong in Paris? Following the establishment of the front in Beijing, Paris was the second location where the front was established, and Mr. Aung Suu Kyi was the one in charge of the representative office in Paris then. Thank you. What were the main missions of this representative office in Paris? The overall goal of establishing this representing office was to propagandize to students in France and elsewhere in Europe. Second objective was to publicize to the media outlets in Europe. And third was to establish relationship with dignitaries as well as political parties in Europe. Thank you. The front, the Phong and the Khmer Student Union had some relationship. Can you describe the relationship between the Phong and the Student Union in France? Response. Back then, students did not resist in order to support communism, but instead they tried to resist to support non-communist movement. That was what I knew at that time. Secondly, the front movement under the direction of Mr. Ieng Sary was meant to reconcile and unite Khmer people who had different political trends to join as one unified association. Thank you. Just now you said that the representative office of Phong in France also published bulletin in France. So can you name can you tell the names of that bulletin? It was called the National United Front of Cambodia Bulletin, if I remember correctly. Thank you. Now I would like to move on to another topic concerning the Khmer delegation in France. Can you tell me the purpose of the visit of Khmer delegations to France? I did not know the main purpose, but what I knew was that they went there in order to publicize information to international community. Question. Who were part of this delegation and who were the head of the Cambodian delegation to France back then? I knew that Ieng Sary was part of the delegation. Mr. Sung Sikun was also part of the delegation. Mr. Chan Juran and others I cannot recall. Thank you. Mr. Ieng Sary was part of this delegation. What was the main agenda for his visit, and where did he go in France, and what statement did he make when he were in Paris? Response. He delivered many statements, but the one I remembered the most was that the Cambodian people would succeed and gain victory based on our own force. And he made this statement following the meeting between the United States and Vietnam and other imperialists, but I cannot recall them all. Question. Did Mr. Ieng Sary ever attend? How often did Mr. Ieng Sary lead the delegation to France? Mr. Ieng Sary visited France the most because he was the one who communicated with his foreign counterparts. He visited South America or other foreign countries, and normally he had to stop by Paris, and he met Cambodian students and Cambodian communities in Paris. And of course, over there in France, there were many Cambodian nationals there, and there were members of media there as well. So he often stopped by Paris, but I cannot recall exactly how many times he visited Paris. Question. You said Mr. Ieng Sary visited Paris often. Did he make that visit prior to 1975 or after 1975? In my personal opinion, I am not sure, but it could be both prior to 1975 and after 1975. Thank you. Question. Did Mr. Ieng Sary ever attend the United Nations General Assembly? Response. Yes. I knew that Mr. Ieng Sary used to visit the United Nations, and he stopped over by Paris. Question. When did he go to the United Nations, and what did he address the United Nations General Assembly then? I'm sorry, I cannot recall the exact date.
តើលោកមានចាំទេអំពី
Question: Can you recall the content of his statement he addressed the United Nations General Assembly?
ដែលខ្ញុំចាំ
The thing that I can still recall was that he repeated many times that the resistance force of Cambodia was self-reliant. We had to rely on our own force, and democratic Cambodia was an independent country and a non-aligned nation. And a country that does not oppose against imperialism.
បាទសូមអរគុណសំណួរទៀតគឺសូមសួរលោកថានៅពេលដែលលោកស្នាក់នៅ
Question: When you were in France before you returned to Cambodia, did you ever hear about the torture or execution of Cambodian people in Cambodia?
បាទតាំង
Response: After Phnom Penh was evacuated, I also heard about the suffering of people in the countryside and mistreatment of people in the countryside. And people who lived in the countryside could not even pick the fruits that they had grown or planted. They could not even cook the chicken that they had raised. But back then, I did not believe that Cambodian people did not have enough food to eat, because I had been away from the country for a long time. Then I could not believe my ears. Even if my brothers who came to tell me the story, I did not believe him. I only believed that Cambodian people did not kill their own people.
បាទអរគុណមិញលោកមានប្រសាសន៍ថាលោក
Thank you. Just now you said that you also heard about the evacuation of people out of Phnom Penh city. How did you know this information, and what else did you know about this evacuation? For example, what was the magnitude of the evacuation itself? I learned from international news, particularly news in French. It discussed a lot about the evacuation. It mentioned about Cambodian people who took refuge in the French embassy, and there was information about the forbidden of people who sought refuge in French embassy. So information were going around in the news at that time, but I did not believe it, because I was convinced that that was not the real situation on the ground in Cambodia at that time.
ក្រោយពីលោកមកទទួលព័ត៌
Thank you. After you received information about the evacuation of people out of the city as well as the execution of the people, did you ever receive any information directly from Mr. Ieng Sari, or did you ever hear any information, explanation whatsoever from the leadership of the Democratic Cambodia then?
នៅពេលនោះខ្ញុំ
At the time, I can recall clearly when he was at the United Nations General Assembly, he had a press statement over there that those people who had been evacuated were returned gradually back to the city, and I was one of the sympathizers of as well, and I so that those people who had sacrificed their life and their happiness to save the country would not do anything that put their country at risk. So whatever he said at that time, I believe completely.
បាទសូមអរគុណឥឡូវនេះខ្ញុំសូមបន្តទៅ
Thank you. So I now move on to another topic concerning the return back to Cambodia. What was the motivation for your repatriation back to Cambodia?
Response. In hindsight, the feeling of many Cambodians, including myself, was that we did not want to stay in foreign country. We want to return and to die back in our native country. That was the strong belief of the general Cambodians. At that time, if I lived overseas and when I closed my eyes, I could imagine my native village, my people and relatives. And I never for once wanted to stay or live till my death in a foreign country. Prosecutor, my apology for arousing such an emotional question to you. Questioned. With whom did you return to Cambodia? The President, the time is appropriate for a afternoon break and also for the witness to recompose himself. We shall take a break and return at 10 through 3. Court officer, could you assist the witness during the break and have him return to the courtroom at 10 through 3.
សូមយើងក្រោកឈរ